everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast where we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. Sincere apologies for the hiatus that the podcast has been on. It has been a hectic few weeks, and that update will come in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, I'm very, very excited to be back with today's episode, which is featuring Adam Cutter. Adam is currently a first seat trainee solicitor at CMS Dubai and former corporate paralegal at Dentons. Adam graduated with a first class law degree from Cardiff University in 2023 and passed both his SQE1 and 2 first time in the first and second quintiles, respectively. Alongside being a lawyer, Adam is also a football content creator on X under an alias, so unfortunately we can't know that name, and a legal content creator on TikTok by the name at Trainee Lawyer. So, in this episode, we discuss why, firstly, Adam decided to pursue a career in law, the experiences that solidified his interest in becoming a commercial solicitor specifically. We also talk about his journey to getting a TC at CMS, including how the time that he spent paralegaling at Dentons really helped him kind of cater and tailor the applications and also choose really which applications and which firms he wanted to apply to. We also obviously talk about life as a trainee solicitor in Dubai, including his work life balance, whether he actually needs to spend any time in the UK to qualify as an England and Wales solicitor, and the best and most challenging aspects of trainee life. We also finally talk about Adam's content creation journey and also whether he thinks every aspiring lawyer should have a social media presence as a way of building their personal brand in 2025. If you're interested in qualifying outside the UK, or you're interested in content creation, or you're interested in exploring other opportunities, I think that this episode is definitely for you. And I would highly, highly recommend reaching out to Adam if you enjoyed today's episode and want to know more or have any burning questions. I'll leave all of his links down below, including his TikTok. So, of course, you can go watch his videos as well to get a bit more information. Just a quick request before we get into the conversation. I'd really, really appreciate if you could kindly give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify or an Apple Podcast, wherever you listen to these episodes, as it really helps the podcast reach more listeners. Without further ado, I thoroughly hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll see you right at the end. Hi, Adam, and welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Super excited to talk to you, and the podcast has been on a bit of a hiatus, so I'm very excited to kickstart it with you and talking a bit about your journey today. So, firstly, we always have an icebreaker on the podcast, which is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Yeah, so thank you for the welcome first and foremost. Glad to be on here. In terms of my superpower, I feel like it's hard because I had a bit of a think about this, and I'm not really sure I have one, apart from potentially, I guess, if I was to go down the route of social media. I feel like I've been able to connect with quite a few people over the years through social media that I guess I never thought I'd be able to, and I think through in different industries as well. So perhaps using social media to connect with others is what I would say, but again, whether that's a superpower or not is debatable.
No, I absolutely think it's superpower, and I think a lot of people can have, and now most of us would have a social media account, but I think really being able to connect with people and creating engaging content, creating community is for sure a superpower, particularly in the digital age. So, and I really want to dive into that as well, because that's one of the first things that I came across as well when looking at all of your content and your journey. But before we do that, to talk a little bit about the legal side, could you tell us firstly sort of what were your main interests and passions growing up, and when did law first come into the picture for you?
So, growing up, I was very much into cricket. Growing up, I played a lot of cricket, and even during school, it was sort of my life. So I played quite a high standard up to Wales level because I grew up in Cardiff. So the Welsh side of things, I was involved in that quite a lot. So that would probably have been my first real interest in something. And then sort of as I got older and closer to university, that sort of wasn't an option, even though it was potentially a sort of an opportunity to pursue that as a career, but it didn't happen for various reasons. And I decided that I obviously wanted to ensure that I was keeping up with my academics. So at the same time, I guess, due to the fact that my father and my sister are in law as well, so I was always surrounded by law. So that's probably
Right.
when law first came into it for me.
And are they both solicitors, or were they in different part of the legal profession?
Yeah, so both solicitors, yeah.
When you decided to sort of go to university, were you ever considering any other paths apart from becoming a solicitor, or was that quite solidified for you early on?
Funnily, before even pursuing a law degree, I was always considering aviation. I'm like quite I'm a
Ah,
bit of a plane nerd. I like planes, I like aviation. So I wanted to be a pilot for the longest time.
yeah.
But that was also alongside law, the interest in law with my family being sort of in law. It was a bit like I didn't know which one I was gonna pursue until it sort of got to before the university stage, and then at university having decided to do law based on numerous reasons, such as obviously having an insight into the profession and seeing what it's like on a day to day kind of got me interested into it. And then, yeah, as soon as I started university, honestly, it was pretty straightforward for me knowing that I wanted to do law, combined with various sort of experiences that I gained, sort of solidified that, I'd say.
Yeah, I feel like we all have that one phase. Like my dad's always been in finance, and I had this huge time where I was like, I'll do anything, but it never related to what he's doing. And then eventually I realized that a lot of my interests were pretty much
Yeah,
aligned with that. So I feel like we all need to need to go through that
100%.
journey before starting uni for sure. And one thing that I really found interesting in your sort of experience at uni was that your range of experience was so vast in terms of the areas and also, in terms of doing, whether that was kind of experience at the bar as well as obviously solicitor related experience. So could you tell us, out of all of those sort of various experiences, was there one that really stood out to you in terms of kind of solidifying your understanding of what it takes to become a solicitor?
So just out of the ones I did whilst at university, or just in general?
Yeah, they could be any. Yeah, absolutely. Any of
In
those.
terms of, I'll give you sort of two answers to this. In terms of at university, because when you're a university student, you probably have limited time to actually source these opportunities.
Yeah.
But I'd say, funnily enough, it was probably a mix of two. So there was one experience that I gained was at a criminal law firm. It was essentially shadowing solicitors there. It was quite early on in sort of my legal journey, but that was the first time I probably got to speak to lawyers that weren't my dad, essentially. So it was a good insight into the profession generally, and then sort of seeing how their mindset is again towards helping clients generally, how they think. Also, I guess
Mm.
an element of it being a business. And then combine that with I did an experience actually before, it might be my second year. It was a business startup that focused on hybrid working and how to utilize like efficiency with hybrid working just coming into play. And it wasn't legal related, but that actually strengthened my interest in commercial law because it was sort of the commercial side of things and how a business startup's got to have all these different considerations. So that those two probably like combined gave me an idea that I wanted to do something commercial and something in law, albeit two different
Hmm.
law that got me to that point. And then after university was when I started paralegaling, and then I think when I paralegaled, that's what prompted me to really pursue being a solicitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting. We've had this discussion on the pod before as well, but so many times, like the experiences don't even necessarily have to be legal for you to understand all the skills required to become a solicitor. But equally, if you want to be a commercial solicitor, really understanding how a business works, and that could be, in a business that even if you're not working in their legal team or you're not doing anything related to law, it really gives you that wide understanding because ultimately your clients aren't lawyers and
Yeah,
understanding their businesses is such a key experience. And I think when rather than trying to pigeonhole yourself at university of only finding legal experience, you can actually branch out and look for other things as well, and your journey really highlights that. During university, what was your journey in terms of applying for VAC schemes and PCs, and how did that end up kind of resulting in you becoming a paralegal at Denton's?
yeah. So in terms of the process for me, my second year and third years, I think I was very much I had focused a bit more on my grades at university as opposed to training contracts and vacation schemes. I did
Hmm.
definitely do applications in my second year and my third year, but I don't think I was sort of not as committed, but as I wasn't paying as much, giving it as much time as I should have, because maybe I underestimated due to not having, again, maybe I don't know whether it was a university thing or I wasn't really aware of what it takes to actually be successful in these applications.
Yeah.
So essentially, my second and third year, when I first started applying, I was getting through stages, but wasn't converting, and it was a bit of an eye opener for me. So that's essentially what prompted me to really think about what I was going to do post university. And I got to the end of my third year, hadn't secured anything, so I thought it was a good opportunity to actually reach out to a variety of law firms to gain some experience. And for me, I thought paralegal experience would be a good option simply based on other people's experiences and just generally, I thought it would be a good opportunity to strengthen my CV before I actually committed to these training contract applications. Um, I guess that worked out, and I guess timing was a factor, and I managed
Yeah.
to secure a role at Denton's quite soon after I graduated, and that was the first real experience I had of commercial law in practice.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, there is such a pressure, especially now, at university, increasingly even from first year, applying for first year schemes and vacation schemes and feeling like you have to have like a job bag before you start. But for so many people, that's not their experience. And in fact, the average age to get a TC is in like your late 20s. So I think that that really goes to show that there are so many routes. And for some people, they might have to paralegal to even figure out whether they actually want to, pursue a career in that and commit to, like you say, the training contract. During your time at Denton's, what were you thinking about in terms of applications? And did you do a lot in that year, or were you quite selective in terms of where you were applying?
I think I was definitely more selective than I had been in previous years. I
Hmm.
think what paralegaling taught me was essentially naturally what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis, of course, but also I think it gave me confidence that I was able to work in that sort of environment and I enjoyed it. And I think
Yeah.
that made a big difference when it came to applications because I felt like I was actually writing with a purpose more. Um, so I think it definitely made a big difference. And in terms of what it showed me in terms of where I was applying, I think I sort of was able to filter firms that I was really interested in based on the type of work they were doing. Since again, I paralegaled in corporate for a while, and that became an interest for me. And sort of working with other teams on deals, which again I was interested in, and that for
Yeah.
me shaped which firms I was then going to apply to for training contracts. Whereas it also, helped me filter other firms where if perhaps it was the first year I was applying, second year I was applying, I might have just applied because their deadline was coming up. So I think having a purposeful application is really important and not just to apply just generally to firms. And that's what I think paralegaling actually helped me do.
And from Cardiff to Dubai, I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, that's such like a fascinating sort of journey, and must have been quite a big jump for you as well, having grown up in Wales and gone to uni there. Can you tell us a bit about when you first were sort of introduced to CMS and when this sort of Dubai office opportunity came to you?
Yeah, so like you said, it's a big change from Cardiff. It's
Yeah.
completely different, but I think I sort of had an idea about Dubai being an option towards the end of university, and it was sort of something where I didn't really know they did training contract applications, and I only found that out when I was paralegaling at Denton's, and I knew they had Middle East opportunities. So I essentially then also had an opportunity while at Denton's to work from the Dubai office, and through that experience, I was able to sort of connect with people in Dubai and just see how the market was different compared to the UK, and then naturally after that experience as a paralegal, I thought, okay, well, potentially there's opportunities for me to apply to training contracts, and that prompted me to actually research which firms had opportunities available, and then that's how I came across CMS, and ultimately led to me applying there.
Amazing. And I think that there's so much discussion now about the growth of the kind of legal market in the Middle East. And obviously, Dubai has increasingly become a popular destination for a lot of young people, whether in law or outside of it. I guess for you, what was that sort of application process in terms of applying to Dubai? Was it quite similar, would you say, to, an application in the UK, or were there certain differences?
It was definitely very similar to the UK. I mean, the only difference I'd say is essentially your motivations to working in the Middle East in Dubai specifically, as opposed to London. Whereas generally the application stages that follow the exact same sort of format as you would expect to when you apply to anywhere in the UK. But the only difference being, I think you'll instead of being tested on why London office or why the UK, it would be an opportunity for you to stand out by showing your awareness of the market in the Middle East as opposed to just general in the UK.
And then I guess, that clear difference about the regions is obviously a big thing because, your clients differ and who you're working with,
Exactly.
and those sorts of areas as well. And from the perspective of, talking about the differences in the legal market, now that you've been there a few months, what sorts of things have you noticed as in terms of how working as a lawyer in Dubai is different, or would you say that it's largely quite similar to the UK?
I think it's different in there is definitely differences, obviously, with again clients that there are here compared to the ones in the UK. They can differ. It's also, I guess, a different way of working in some ways. There's certain things or certain transactions that don't follow the same methodology that they do in the UK, and there's obviously different entities that you would be interacting with in the UAE. And just generally in certain areas, I think it's just a different way of working and a different way of approaching a deal or a transaction as opposed to what it was like in the UK. And I think having also paralegal in the UK and seeing what that was like, I think there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities, and I feel like the similarities sort of made that a bit easier so far since I've joined to at least settle in relatively easier. But at the same time, I think it's not the exact same market, and that you do see the differences, whether that be because of the clients or the way teams would approach transaction, and just different things to think about.
Sure. And, as a content creator yourself, you've probably seen a lot of noise online about work-life balance and young lawyers and things like that. From your perspective as a lawyer working in Dubai, are there differences? Is there a better work-life balance, or is it very much sort of, as a trainee, you are putting in those long hours?
I think it's definitely dependent on the team you're in. I think it's also the case in the UK. I don't think there is sort of blanket term to say, oh, that this X firm is going to have great work-life balance. It very much, I think, depends on the seat. Naturally, if you're in corporate, you probably would have more peaks and troughs in your hours, and I think that's what people tend to say. And I think it's probably true that whether that be in Dubai or London, your hours will vary. In corporate, for example, based on the deal. If it's time sensitive, naturally you might be working a bit later. Whereas some areas of law, some seats, they might have more regular hours. I think for me so far, I mean, it's been fairly regular finishes. Like usually I can log off around 6. However, there've been times where I've had to stay a bit longer just because of the stage the deal's at. So towards the end, then naturally there'll be more things to action, and then the deadlines can move a bit later into the night. But again, I'm pretty sure it will just vary seat by seat. Potentially, my next seat I might have more regular ones, or again peaks and troughs with the hours. So yeah, I would say work-life balance, it just is a very seat dependent thing personally from my experience that I've seen.
So it's probably just when you look outside at 4 p.m. It's not
Yeah.
dark like the UK there, mainly being the difference. Someone's probably thinking, okay, this is really cool that you can even do like a training contract, kind of in another office of a firm that even if it's based like globally, and then that opportunity might be enticing to a lot of people. But someone also might be thinking, qualifying as an English lawyer in Dubai, how does that process sort of work? I mean, is there anything that is that like you have to do a seat in the UK, or can you entirely do your entire training contract out in Dubai?
So we do, and I'm pretty sure a lot of firms give an option to do a London seat, which is again, if you want to do the London seat, you can do the London seat. But as far as I'm aware, and as far as I know as well, you can do your entire training contract for 2 years in Dubai and still qualify as England and Wales. I suppose the key part of that is your supervision or your supervisor would need to be England and Wales qualified, and
Right.
that's what allows you to sort of qualify as England and Wales is essentially the fact that your supervision is all the sort of the supervision that's happening in the office is all done by people that are SRA regulated and supervised from that aspect. So yeah, you can do 2 years in Dubai and qualify as an England and Wales lawyer.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure that that's probably music to lots of people's ears. And we spoke, at the start about this big transition from Cardiff to Dubai. So I guess from your personal perspective, what's been the most enjoyable aspect of working as a trainee in Dubai, and what's something that you still find a bit challenging?
Good question. The most challenging aspect, probably the weather in when it's hot. I think as someone that
Yeah.
grew up in Cardiff, there's so much greenery around me, and there's so much like place I can just walk to, whether it's summer or winter, you can just walk. So having to adjust to the weather and not being able to walk outside in the summer is probably the biggest challenge, which is again a minor thing, but
Yeah.
it's definitely part of the moving process. Whereas I think the most enjoyable thing I've found so far having started is I think probably the nature of how the office is in Dubai is quite small compared to London offices. And I think naturally as a trainee, you're probably more exposed to sort of the senior members of the team. And I found that quite enjoyable being able to be on a day-to-day in the office, hearing about some of the partners or senior associates and associates, how they interact with clients, for example, on a day-to-day, and having the opportunity to just have a chat with them, which when you have a really, really small cohort or a small office, I feel like it's easier to do. So I'm really
Mm.
enjoying that aspect, and it was one of the main reasons I applied to Dubai too, having that sort of close knit and also being able to work closely with senior members of the team. Um, but yeah, from a non-law perspective, I've just sort of been enjoying the lifestyle out here. I think it aligns more with what
Yeah.
I enjoy, and I think having been in the UK for a long time as well, I think it was yeah, sort of was keen to have a change of scenery.
Absolutely. And from you mentioned sort of, working with key members of the team. I guess one thing that people might be thinking is that, if a lot of the main work is happening in London, is it that a lot of your work is kind of supporting on those deals, or would you say that there's a lot of independent deals that the Dubai office is doing where you're not just supporting, but you or your supervisor are running that whole deal?
Yeah, it's I was also thinking that as well. I was wondering that myself before joining how that would be. And I mean from my experience so far, there's definitely a lot of deal flow from the Middle East region. And then whether that's the UAE or just the wider Middle East, a lot of work that is done purely in the Middle East. And then
Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, personally, I haven't experienced much yet, but I know there's obviously a lot of work, like you mentioned, which has like a focus elsewhere, and then one component is the Middle East work or the UAE work. So it's a bit of both, but there's a lot of work, and I suppose that is also in line with how this region is developing a lot more, and the work here is picking up. And so maybe that's also partly because I've joined at such a time where like there's quite a lot of work that's going on, which is not sort of as a just led elsewhere, but a lot actually started in the Middle East. So I think that's also been quite cool, having a sort of variety of work from again different areas and from I guess different locations.
For sure. I think it's a great time to be working in the Middle East and to be training at a time like this as well, because you're really learning that process of like when a legal market is actually growing as opposed to something that's been established for a really long time. So it's going to be super cool to see, what happens in the next couple of years, couple of decades. And we spoke a lot about sort of, your work in terms of being a lawyer. The other part that I wanted to talk about, which you mentioned right at the start, was obviously content creation and engaging people on social media. And, you have sort of football content that you create as well as legal content. So when did you first start creating content and why did you feel a desire to do so?
So I started in lockdown, which I used to say that, and then it used to seem like oh lockdown like 1 year ago, 2 year ago. But now when I say lockdown, it's
I
like
know.
5 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
like it's becoming a long time ago. So I like yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a while. Maybe 5 years ago I started. I started on Twitter essentially just tweeting my thoughts about football. It was more so just a random thing where I was in lockdown like everyone, just not knowing what to do, but I guess not having friends to talk to about the football who I would usually be talking to within school
Yeah.
meant that I wanted to at least talk to someone about what I thought about the football game, and that's how it started, just on Twitter. The more I was tweeting, I noticed the more people were sort of interacting with my posts, and then that just kept building over a span of like 3 4 years, where just kept getting bigger and bigger, and I sort of gave my attention to that during university. It was sort of like lectures from like I don't know 9 to 3, and then make sure I'm on social media from that until like three
Yeah.
to five. So it became like a part-time job, and then yeah, then got to around I suppose just after finishing law degree, I sort of really enjoyed talking to people about law, but also like helping others. Um, and I think that's what stemmed the me starting an account based on law.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I just started to make posts on TikTok and sort of picked up mainly after I started the SQE, but and actually when I was paralegaling a bit, that's when it sort of really sort of picked up, and then I sort of enjoyed doing that as well.
In terms of the legal one, that aspect of like of judgment or fear of being judged by maybe people who are like older at the firm or other lawyers, did you feel that fear at all, and or do you feel like actually nowadays it's just a part of the norm essentially?
Yeah, it's probably something I probably thought about very briefly, but honestly, I don't personally worry about that sort of thing because I feel like, especially with law and the content I'm making in that sphere, it's very much, I mean, I do it with the aim of helping others who have been through what I went through, and
Absolutely.
also sort of giving back because I've met a lot of and spoken to a lot of trainees back in the day when I was applying who would take their time out of their day to help me, and it was essentially giving that forward. But because I already had an existing interest in social media, it was just tying both together. I just think it's not something I really think about in terms of what others think, and I think it's important to do that because it's also part of a personal brand, which I think is important, especially in this day and age, and building that sort of personal brand. And that's sort of the way I went with it. I don't know like if what would have happened if I was to pay more attention to what others think, but I feel like whatever you do in life, everyone's always going to have an opinion, but the one that matters is your own, and I sort of try and stay by that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't really think about what others would think in a way, especially when the content is pretty much just law. You can't really go too far wrong with it. Yeah.
For sure. And watching some of your content, I think what I really like about it is it's very clear, and yet you make it so engaging, and you want to watch it, but you're also giving out really useful information, which I think is, especially now in the day and age when everyone has such short attention spans, trying to deliver information in a short manner is really such a key skill. So I'm sure that if anything, it's just helping that skill of lawyers being concise, which is always required, particularly for clients who don't want all the legal jargon. In terms of the branding aspect, I think it's really interesting speaking to people as well about, a lot more people now having social media accounts and trying to create that brand. I guess from your perspective, do you think that for aspiring lawyers now, it's actually quite crucial for them to have something on social media to be building a brand in that way?
Look, it's people will have different opinions on this, and I think it's I personally do think that aspect, I mean, is important. I mean, when it comes to the law side of things, I only made my LinkedIn, I think, in second year of uni. I was quite late to the party considering I think people are on it. Even now, I see people are on it like A levels, and like people do make a start early. And I'm
Yeah.
quite shocked by that, if they're like that switched on. I was never that switched on at that stage. So, I think it can be important. I wouldn't say it's like necessarily crucial to do so in the sense that people can be, obviously I can imagine them being extremely capable lawyers without having a sort of anything on social media. It's just something I think with the way the world is evolving, and I guess with how technology is evolving and how social media is being perceived within limits, of course. It's I think it's important to have that sort of personal brand. But it's also, I guess, a case of building relationships and connecting with others. And as part of a training, when you're applying for training contracts, one thing I always did, and one thing that people would always tell me to do, was to reach out to trainees and in positions that you wanted to be in. And part of that was sort of connecting and building those relationships, and naturally you just build a brand. But I think it's a bit of a 50-50 on whether everyone should do so, because there's a lot more involved to it, and not everyone will want to do that and put themselves out there as well, because that's a very different thing to do and it can feel quite unnatural.
I think that that last point you mentioned about, connecting with people, I think that really is the key, and that's what it should be used for, especially if you want to, be a lawyer, because so much of your job is building those relationships with clients. So if you can do that and you can start doing it now, I think that really, really is the key. And you are currently in your first seat. So I guess in terms of looking ahead, what are you sort of hoping for during your training contract? What are your sort of goals that you're looking towards?
So yeah, I mean, I think I'm just sort of taking it a day at a time at the moment, because the work I'm finding in my seat is so varied, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of having no days, no one day is the same. Every day is something different, and I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of goals is essentially to make sure, for me it's essentially an attitude thing as well. And having spoken to, again, senior members of the team, I think as a trainee, there's not necessarily going to be the highest of expectations when it comes to what you're doing. It's just because, again, they don't expect you to know anything, and I think that's quite standard across all trainee positions. Partners, etc. They're not expecting you to be, a pro at the law from day one. That's just not how a trainee position works. So
Yeah.
I'm enjoying sort of the learning aspect of it, and the fact that every conversation I have or every task I'm given, it always has a wider meaning to it. There's always a deliverable to it. There's always a client that you'll have an impact on. So I think it's just to continue developing that interest in what I'm doing, because naturally there are going to be areas I've not looked at before. Same with energy and infrastructure, which is my first seat. I had no sort of experience in it before, so I found that a good opportunity to get stuck into something completely new, and I'm enjoying that. And I think that's just going to be the case across all the seats. But going back to what I first said, I think it all goes down to attitude, and I think as a trainee, if your attitude is right, the rest should follow. So my aim is essentially to keep that attitude the same and as consistent as I can across the 2 years to ensure that I get the most out of that learning experience, I'd say.
Yeah, like you say, it's called a training contract for a reason. So
Yeah.
the more that you can learn through that time, it's really you've kind of been given those 2 years to be able to absorb as much as possible. So I think that's fantastic, and I'm sure that you're going to have a great 2 years and more hopefully at CMS as well. We always end with a rapid fire, so we've got a final three questions. So
Sure.
the first one, probably gonna be very different to anyone who's in the UK, but what does an ideal weekend in your life currently look like?
I would say an ideal weekend is probably traveling somewhere local, which because the Middle East obviously naturally there's so many surrounding. Like this weekend, I went to Doha on leave. Like it was a 45-minute flight.
Nice.
So I
Yeah.
think for me now that being here, there's areas I want to explore that I haven't obviously when I was in the UK because the flight's a lot longer. Whereas here it's, it would take like a 5-hour drive if you wanted to drive to Qatar, for example, or a 45
Yeah.
minute flight. So I think an ideal weekend for me is the one that just went by. I just went for a day and a half to Doha. And yeah, I just had an amazing time. And there's a few other places surrounding in the surrounding areas that I'd like to visit next. So right now it'd probably be traveling.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Number two is if you could relive one day of your life, which one would you choose?
That's a very difficult question. If I could relive one day in my life, um, I don't know. Maybe when Chelsea won the Champions League in 2012, I would have been what, like 11 years old. But I vividly remember, I vividly remember that day running up and down the corridor, um, and like for some reason that stuck with me. But that was a very happy day. So I'd like to relive that just because it would bring back a lot of nostalgia, I think.
Yeah. If only you had apps then, we could go back and figure out your accounts. Like
Literally,
you
yeah.
say, unfortunately
Yeah,
not.
unfortunately, no.
Yeah. And final question, after your first part actually, what are the top three travel destinations currently on your bucket list?
Ooh. Um, Currently, it's a really good question. I've been thinking about this for a while. I think New Zealand's up there in the top three. Indonesia, I'd say,
Yeah.
and then potentially Singapore.
Oh,
Those are
very
three
nice.
places that I haven't visited that I'd really like to visit.
Yeah, and all a lot closer from Dubai, I think, from the UK. So hopefully quicker as
Definitely,
well.
yeah, definitely a lot easier now than it was
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much today for coming on, Adam. Seeing your journey in Dubai is fascinating, and I'm sure that lots of people will be reaching out after this to ask you about the same. So thank you for giving us your time today.
No worries at all. Thank you for your questions. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, thank you once again.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to Adam for coming on Commerce Meets Law. If you enjoyed this episode and want more from lawyers qualifying outside the UK, or it's a topic that you're interested in, then please do let me know by emailing commercemeetslaw@gmail.com or with a DM on Instagram at Commerce Meets Law. And you can also reach out to us on our website, which will be linked down in the description. Finally, for access to my content, do check out the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel and our TikTok. For now, take care and goodbye.